I'm Tom Serb, Director of Midwest Music Academy. In today's video, we'll look at the development of the musical staff and clefs. Ancient music used the letters of the musical alphabet above the lyrics, as you saw in the last video. After the musical alphabet was reduced to 7 letters, with notes separated by an octave sharing the same name, the musical alphabet was no longer practical. If you saw the note CF, you wouldn't know if it was going up or down. So the next development in music notation was to represent the sounds graphically with marks placed above the lyrics. This could show us the shape of a melody, but we didn't know how high or low it was supposed to be. To help figure that out, a reference line was added in the 10th century to represent F. Because this line was commonly written in red, it was called a red line notation, and it survived in some places for about 500 years. The reference line told us if a sound was supposed to be higher or lower than the reference pitch, but it couldn't tell us by how much. What we really needed was a ruler so we could measure the distance from the reference pitch to the note that we needed. In the 11th century, we started putting the ruler on the page with the invention of the staff. This places the dots either on lines or in spaces, and each line or space held only one specific note. Guido di Arezzo, the same guy who invented solfege, is usually credited with inventing the staff, but the idea is a couple of centuries older. This is from a music theory book written in the 9th century called the Musica and Curiatis. Guido would have been aware of this book, which clearly arranged lyrics on a staff. If you look closely at the column on the left side, you'll even see S next to some lines and T next to others, showing if the spaces were a tone or a semitone apart. But it's certainly true that Guido and other monks helped popularize the use of the staff. Guido's staff had 4 lines, and at first the lines were color-coded with the F in red and the C in blue or green. Monks also wrote a letter at the beginning of a line. C, F, and G were used, and they are called the clef, which is French for key. It's the key to deciphering what sound a dot represents. The clef could be placed at any line. In this example, the first 4 staves use F on the second line, the next one puts F on the 4th line, then it moves back to the second line, and the last 3 staves use a C clef on the 3rd line. The use of a clef made the colored lines redundant, and the lines soon became all red or all black. The size of the staff changed over time. Guido's staff used 4 lines, which was enough to write down the melody of a hymn or chant with a range of an octave. But as notation started being used for instrumental music, 4 wasn't enough. So we added as many as we needed. Too many lines becomes hard to read. In addition, the invention of the printing press tended to standardize things. It's easier to print music using movable type if you can use the same staff for every composition, printing the notes in a second pass. So by the mid-1700s, we had settled on an 11-line staff called the grand staff, printing the center line only when it's needed. Music for keyboard instruments separates the staves, making it easy for the musician to see which hand plays a part, but there's still only one line in between them. The 2 notes here represent the same sound on that middle line. We call the line middle C because it's in the middle of the grand staff. When we need to use the line to indicate middle C, the line is written just a little bit wider than the note, and we call it a ledger line. We also use ledger lines to go above or below the grand staff, and the break between each line helps us see exactly how far a note is from the staff lines. Except for keyboard instruments, the harp, and some mallet percussion instruments like the marimba, instruments use a single staff, using ledger lines whenever the music moves outside of the staff range. Over time, the shape of the letters changed. A 1918 book titled A History of Music by Charles Stanford and Cecil Forsyth cataloged the shape of the clefs over time. Each placement of a clef developed its own name. Notice there are 2 baritone clefs. If F is on the 3rd line, C will be the 5th line. The use of the F clef for baritone parts was more common in France, so it's sometimes called the French baritone clef. Today there are just 4 clef placements that are common. The alto C clef is used for viola music. The tenor C clef is used for high passages for bassoon, cello, and trombone. And the treble G or bass F clefs are used for all other instruments. Because we only use one placement of the G and F clef today, I prefer to call them by their original names, the G and F clefs, because that tells you what they do. If you ever have trouble remembering the names of the lines and spaces, you can simply count from the G or the F. In case you're curious, the term treble clef started being used in the 1600s, and it referred to choral music. In a mixed choir, the soprano, alto, and tenor voices use a G clef, and the bass voice uses an F clef. The G clef appears in 3 parts. It is tripled or treble, while the F clef is used only for the bass. In the next video, we'll look at the development of sharps and flats. Until then, I'm Tom Serb from Midwest Music Academy.